At 4 p.m. Eastern Time on April 21, 2026, President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, not unexpectedly so, and upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan, we have been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. I have therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and, in all other respects, remain ready and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded one way or the other. The word that mattered was not in the statement. It was what the statement avoided. Any deadline. Not 3 days, not 10 days, not 2 weeks. Indefinitely. The ceasefire that had been set to expire Wednesday evening was now open-ended. This was not the Trump of February 28th, who had announced Operation Epic Fury with a video declaring Iran would face total annihilation. This was not the Trump of April 6th, who had threatened extensive attacks on Iranian energy sites if Hormuz remained closed. This was a president who had spent 72 hours oscillating between Iran has agreed to everything and the whole country is getting blown up, now landing on a position that his own administration had not anticipated. The framing was revealing. Trump attributed the extension not to American strategic calculation, but to Pakistani request. Field Marshal Asim Munir, now elevated to number 1 in Trump's acknowledgements ahead of Prime Minister Sharif, had become the decisive voice. The president, who had campaigned on America First, was justifying retreat as deference to a Pakistani general. 3 days before the indefinite extension, a more disturbing story emerged. Larry Johnson, a retired CIA analyst, appeared on Judge Andrew Napolitano's Judging Freedom podcast and alleged that during an emergency White House meeting on Saturday evening, April 18th, Trump had demanded access to the nuclear codes. One report coming out of that meeting at the White House is that Trump wanted to use the so-called use the nuclear codes, and General Dan Caine stood up and said no, Johnson claimed. He described Caine leaving the meeting with his head down to the ground in confusion and panic. The claim went viral. Newsweek published it, MSN amplified it, social media treated it as confirmed fact. The White House called it false. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina expressed skepticism. Senator Tom Tillis. I'd have to see a couple of source confirmations before I even dignify that question with an answer. But the allegation's significance lay not in its verifiability, but in its plausibility. By April 21st, it had become part of the interpretive framework through which the indefinite ceasefire was read. If Trump had reached for nuclear escalation and been blocked by his own military, then the ceasefire extension was not strategy. It was the aftermath of a failed attempt at escalation. The Wall Street Journal had already reported that Trump was intentionally excluded from the Situation Room during the April 6th rescue operation because aides, believing his impatience, wouldn't be helpful. The Atlantic had revealed that aides now treat him like he cannot handle the reality of the war in Iran, keeping him in a protective bubble of explosion videos rather than casualty reports. The nuclear codes allegation, whether true or not, fit a pattern of presidential exclusion that was independently verified. Trita Parsi, the Quincy Institute vice president who had predicted this outcome weeks earlier, posted his assessment within hours of Trump's announcement. Trump caves and agrees to extend the ceasefire while presenting it as a function of the Iranian government being in disarray. Parsi expanded. No deal, no sanctions relief, no nuclear compromise, no return to war while Iran continues to control the Strait of Hormuz. Not a stable situation, but one in which Trump pockets the central thing he sought, exiting the war, while Iran is bereft of the main thing it was looking for, sanctions lifting. The analysis was brutal in its clarity. Trump had not achieved a deal. He had achieved an exit. Iran had not achieved sanctions relief. It had achieved survival. The fractured government framing allowed Trump to claim credit for Iranian weakness, while obscuring American failure to secure any of its stated objectives. John Kiriakou, the former CIA officer who had resigned on principle from the Bush administration, offered a parallel assessment. This is a good move. It buys us time, but we must acknowledge that under current conditions, there are no military solutions, and a true settlement is unlikely. His recommendation: follow the Reagan 1983 model, withdraw from Lebanon after the Marine barracks bombing, refocus on domestic issues, win the next election. The Reagan parallel was deliberate. In October 1983, 241 American Marines died in Beirut. Reagan did not escalate. He withdrew. The forever war architecture that had consumed American foreign policy since 2001 was, in this reading, being abandoned for electoral calculation. While Trump extended, Iran refused. Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi had already declared on April 24th, Blockading Iranian ports is an act of war and thus a violation of the ceasefire. Striking a commercial vessel and taking its crew hostage is an even greater violation. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf stated, "We do not accept negotiations under the shadow of threats." The Tasneem news agency, linked to the IRGC, published an analysis of Trump's extension that exposed the Iranian reading. 5 scenarios were outlined: continuation of shadow war, Israeli exploitation of the pause, escalation in Lebanon, increased targeting of Iran, and most significantly, the possibility that IRGC commanders were now operating beyond civilian control. This was the fractured government narrative turned against its American authors. If Iran's government was fractured, it was not because American decapitation strikes had succeeded. It was because the IRGC, whose commander General Wahidi had allegedly overruled civilian negotiators Araghchi and Ghalibaf, was asserting military autonomy over diplomatic caution. The White House had put Vice President J.D. Vance's trip to Islamabad on hold. Iran had not committed to attending a second round of talks. The indefinite ceasefire was, in operational terms, a unilateral American pause in a war that Iran continued to prosecute through Hormuz closure and proxy operations. The indefinite ceasefire reveals 3 structural realities of the 2026 Iran war. First, the American president has lost operational control of his own war. The nuclear code's allegation reflects a genuine constitutional crisis. General Caine's reported refusal, the Situation Room exclusion, the aide's protective bubble, all point to a presidency being managed around rather than through. Second, the diplomatic track has become a performance for domestic consumption rather than a mechanism for conflict resolution. Trump extends ceasefires he cannot enforce, claims victories he has not achieved, and attributes his own strategic paralysis to Pakistani mediation. The indefinite extension is not patience. It is the absence of alternatives. Third, Iran has learned the lesson of 2018. The JCPOA experience, negotiation, compliance, and unilateral American withdrawal has produced absolute distrust. Araghchi's act of war framing, Ghalibaf's shadow of threats rejection, and the IRGC's autonomous military operations all reflect a regime that has concluded negotiation with this president is impossible. The question is not whether the ceasefire will hold. It is whether the ceasefire means anything when both sides continue to prosecute economic warfare while claiming the moral high ground of restraint. Trump has achieved what Parsi predicted: exit without settlement, pause without peace, and the appearance of control without its substance. Iran has achieved what its mosaic defense strategy was designed for: survival through fragmentation, resistance through decentralization, and the demonstration that American military power cannot produce political outcomes. The architecture of forever war has not been resolved. It has been suspended indefinitely by a president who wants out, a military that won't escalate, and an adversary that has learned to wait.